The morning my rosemary plant fell off the porch railing, I didn't know it would change everything. It wasn't even a dramatic fall. The pot just tipped, slowly, almost politely, and shattered on the front steps in 3 clean pieces. I stood there in my bathrobe, holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched yet, staring at the dirt spreading across the concrete, and I thought, that's about right. That's exactly where I am. The rosemary had been with me for 6 years. I brought it home the week my husband Derek and I moved into our first apartment in Portland. I kept it on every windowsill through every move, trimmed it back when it got too wild, talked to it on bad days. Derek always said I was strange for that. He said a lot of things. A voice came from the driveway next door. I can fix that. I looked up. The man standing at the edge of the property line was tall, maybe early 40s, wearing a gray Henley and holding a set of car keys loosely in one hand. He had the kind of stillness about him that made you notice him without understanding why. Dark eyes, a small scar along the left side of his jaw, a black lab sitting obediently at his heel. "It's just a pot," I said. "Pots can be repaired," he said. "Good morning. I'm Marcus. I moved in 3 weeks ago." I had seen him exactly once before that, carrying boxes from a moving truck in the rain. I had not introduced myself because I was in the middle of packing my own boxes, the kind you pack when a marriage ends. "Claire," I said. "Sorry about the noise," he smiled, just slightly, and went to his car. His dog watched me for a moment before following. I swept up the rosemary and the broken pieces and went back inside and sat at the kitchen table and cried for the 3rd morning in a row, not about the pot, about the fact that this was my house now, mine alone, and I still didn't know how to feel about that. My name is Claire Waverly. I am 31 years old. I am a registered nurse at Providence Medical Center, and for 4 years I was married to Derek Holt, who is a corporate attorney and the most quietly cruel person I have ever known. We met when I was 26. He was charming in the way that certain men are, thoughtfully charming, deliberately charming, like a skill he had practiced. He remembered what you told him. He showed up exactly when he said he would. He made you feel, in the beginning, like the most important person in any room. We married after 18 months. My mother cried happy tears at the ceremony. His parents flew in from Connecticut and took us to dinner at a restaurant with a 12-week reservation wait. Everything looked right. The first miscarriage happened 8 months into the marriage. I was 10 weeks along. The second happened 14 months later at 9 weeks. After the second one, something shifted in Derek. Not toward me. Not in the way I needed. He shifted away. He became clinical about it. Practical. He said things like the body has its own timeline, and we should talk to a specialist in the same tone he used for scheduling conflicts. What he did not do was hold me. What he did, eventually, was ask me to sign a post-nuptial financial agreement. He framed it as protection. For both of us, his firm was growing. There were assets to consider. The paperwork was dense and full of language I didn't understand. I asked to have someone review it. He said there wasn't time, that the window for filing was closing, that his partner had specifically advised this structure. I was 8 weeks out from the second miscarriage, and I was exhausted in a way that went past physical. I signed it. I didn't find out until 14 months later, when a paralegal at his firm sent me an email she meant for someone else, that he had been involved with a colleague named Stephanie for almost 2 years. I confronted him on a Thursday evening. He did not deny it. He sat across from me at our kitchen island and spoke in complete, measured sentences, and he told me the marriage had run its course, that he had been unhappy for some time, and not the agreement I had signed entitled me to a small settlement and nothing from the joint investment accounts we had built together over 4 years. When I said that wasn't fair, he said, "Fair is subjective, Claire. Legal is not." He gave me 60 days to vacate the house we had bought together. He was already moving Stephanie in before I finished packing. I found the rental in Ashland, Oregon, because a nurse on my floor grew up there and said it was quiet and had good air and was the kind of place where things felt slower in a way that helped. I needed slower. I took the house sight unseen based on photos and a virtual tour and the fact that it had a south-facing porch where I thought the rosemary might do well. I moved in on a Tuesday in February, in the rain, and my neighbor Marcus helped me carry a box of books up the front steps without being asked, because he was walking out to get his mail, and it was simply there to be done. I said thank you. He said of course. That was the extent of our first conversation. The pot sat in 3 pieces on my kitchen counter for a week before I figured out what to do with it. I was working a 12-hour shift when I came home to find the pieces had been fitted back together with something, not glued invisibly, but filled with a thin gold line, like the seams were being honored instead of hidden. There was a small handwritten note on top. Kintsugi. Japanese method. Gold in the breaks. Thought it suited. Immi stood in my kitchen in my scrubs holding the repaired pot for a long time. I didn't know how to feel about that either. I had been in my house for 3 weeks and I had barely spoken to this man, and he had taken something broken of mine and made it into something worth looking at again. I knocked on his door that evening. His dog pressed its nose to the glass panel before Marcus opened it. That was a kind thing to do, I said. Thank you. I had the supplies, he said. How's the rosemary? Recovering, I said. He nodded. They're resilient. I went home and put the pot back on the porch railing. Spring came slowly to Ashland, the kind of spring that is tentative, that tests the air before committing. I worked long shifts and came home to a quiet house and cooked dinners. I did not much enjoy eating alone and called my mother on Sunday evenings without telling her how I actually was. My mother knew Derek had been unfaithful. She did not know about the agreement. I was ashamed of that in a way I couldn't fully explain, not of being deceived, but of having let exhaustion and grief make me passive when I should have asked harder questions. My mother was sharp and loving and would not have blamed me, but I wasn't ready for her not to blame me. That sounds strange. It was true. Marcus and I developed the kind of neighbor relationship built from small proximities. We waved when we got the mail. He had a truck and once helped me move a piece of furniture I'd bought secondhand. I learned he took his coffee black and drank it on the porch early enough that the street was still quiet. I learned his dog was named River and was 7 years old and had been with him through things he hadn't described. I learned he had served Navy 8 years and then worked for a federal investigations unit he described only as financial crimes, white collar. He had been in Portland when we spoke, then took a break, which was why he was in Ashland. He didn't ask me many questions about my life. It took me a few weeks to understand that wasn't indifference. It was a kind of patience. He was letting me offer things at my own pace. Nobody in my recent life had done that. One evening in April, I was sitting on the porch watching the light change, and he walked across the property line and sat in the other chair without asking, and we just watched the street get dark for about 40 minutes without saying anything that mattered. And it was the most at ease I had felt in longer than I could remember. "Can I ask what brought you here?" he said finally. "Divorce," I said. "You?" "Same," he said. "More or less." We didn't talk about it more than that. Not that night. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in late April. I was at work, between patients, and it was a number I didn't recognize. An attorney in Portland named Helen Marsh, who said she had been referred to me through a colleague and had some information I might want to review. I almost didn't take the meeting. I drove up on a Saturday. Helen Marsh had an office that looked like someone who had stopped trying to impress people. Comfortable chairs, plants that needed water, a window overlooking a parking structure. She was in her late 50s and wore her reading glasses on a chain and looked at me over them when she spoke. She told me the postnuptial agreement I had signed had procedural problems. Derek's firm had drafted it in a way that was technically compliant but ethically questionable. Specifically, he had not disclosed all relevant assets before I signed, and the timeline had been artificially compressed to prevent independent review. She said if I chose to contest it, she believed there was a viable case. I asked how she had found me. She looked at her desk for a moment before answering. She said someone had flagged the agreement as part of a broader inquiry into Derek's firm. Not about our marriage specifically, but about patterns in how certain documents had been structured across multiple cases. My situation had been identified as one that warranted notification. I drove back to Ashland in a kind of silence that was different from the quiet I had been living in. This was the silence of something that had been holding still, starting to move. I didn't go to Marcus. I want to be clear about that order. I didn't go to him with this. We were neighbors. We drank coffee sometimes. I liked him in the uncomplicated way you like someone who consistently shows up as exactly who they appear to be. It was River who made it happen, in the way dogs manage things by simply existing in the wrong place. He got out through a gate Marcus had left unlatched while doing yard work, and I found him sitting on my porch at 8 in the morning looking pleased with himself. Marcus knocked on my door 10 minutes later looking genuinely mortified. He goes where he wants, he said. I'm sorry, I don't mind. I said, I made too much coffee. He came in. I don't know why I told him. Something about the kitchen being warm and River settling under the table and the way Marcus listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, actually listening, made the words come out more easily than I expected. I told him about Helen Marsh, about the agreement, about the 14 months of not knowing, and the 2-sentence email from the paralegal that blew up a life I had thought was simply struggling. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. What are you going to do? He said. I think I'm going to fight it, I said. It was the first time I had said it out loud. It felt different that way. Sturdier. He nodded slowly. Good. Then he told me something I had not known. He told me that the broader inquiry Helen Marsh had referenced, the one that had flagged my agreement, was connected to a federal investigation his former unit had opened 18 months ago. He wasn't on the case. He had been on leave, which was why he was in Ashland. But he knew its outlines. Derek's firm had been under review for a pattern of documentation practices in high-asset divorce cases. My agreement was one of several that had surfaced. He had not known it was me when he moved in next door. He said this carefully, looking at me directly, because he understood how it could sound. He had not known my name. He had taken the rental because it was available and he needed to be somewhere outside Portland for a while. I sat with that for a moment. So you didn't come here because of me, I said. No, he said. But I'm glad you're here. River put his head on my foot. Outside, the rosemary caught the morning light. The months that followed were not a straight line. Life rarely gives you those. I hired Helen Marsh. The legal process was slow and administrative, and required me to reconstruct a paper trail of finances I had trusted Derek to manage. My mother came for 2 weeks in June, and finally learned all of it. The agreement, the miscarriages, the way I had been slowly convinced that my confusion was a personal failing rather than a deliberate design. She sat at my kitchen table and held my hand and said, "You are not what happened to you." She said it twice. She was right both times. Marcus and I had dinner together for the first time in early May. Real dinner at a table with a bottle of wine his sister had recommended. We talked until the candle burned low. He told me about his marriage, which had ended 3 years ago quietly and by mutual recognition. No cruelty, just two people who had wanted different things and taken too long to admit it. He had a daughter, 7 years old, who spent every other weekend with him in Ashland, and was currently obsessed with marine biology and had opinions about River's diet that Marcus found both inconvenient and deeply impressive. Her name was Nora, and she showed up one Saturday in June in rain boots and a ponytail and immediately located the rosemary on the porch and asked me its name with complete seriousness. "I've been calling it just rosemary," I said. She considered this. "That's not a name," she said. "That's a label." I looked at Marcus over her head. He gave me the look of a man who had been corrected this way many times and had made his peace with it. "What should I call it?" I asked her. She thought about it. "Rosie," she said. "So she knows you know she's a she. So she knows you know she's a she." I named the plant Rosie. I have not regretted it. The legal process moved into summer. Derek's attorney sent several letters attempting to settle for amounts that increased incrementally in a way that confirmed Helen's assessment. They were worried. Derek himself called once in July and told me I was making things complicated for no reason and that I should take the current offer and be practical. I told him practical was subjective. Legal was not. He was quiet for 2 seconds. Then he hung up. Helen later told me his firm was under formal investigation and that 3 other settlements had already been reopened. The documentation patterns flagged in my case had appeared in 7 others. Derek's partner, the one who had supposedly advised the agreement timeline, was cooperating with the investigation. In August, the settlement terms changed significantly. I will not share the number. What I will tell you is that it was enough. Enough to stop being scared about my savings. Enough to pay Helen without anxiety. Enough to feel like the 4 years of building something together had actually been acknowledged as real. The morning Helen called with the final confirmation, I went outside and sat with my coffee on the porch and held the gold-seamed pot and sat with the strange feeling of a chapter actually ending. Marcus came out with his own coffee. He didn't ask. He just sat in the other chair. "It's done," I said. "How does it feel?" he said. I had to think about it. "Like I can breathe forward again," I said, "instead of just sideways." He nodded. River went to sleep in the patch of sun between our chairs. I need to tell you what happened next, because this is the part that surprised me most. Not in the dramatic way the movies promise, but in the way real things surprise you, which is quietly and over time, and in ways you only fully understand looking backward. Marcus and I did not fall into each other the way people do in stories. What happened was slower and more considered and more honest than that. We talked a great deal. We disagreed sometimes about things that mattered and things that didn't, and found that neither of us collapsed under disagreement, which after 4 years with Derek felt like an extraordinary discovery. He told me in September, on the porch, in the evening, that he had feelings for me that he was not going to act on without telling me first. He said it straightforwardly, the way he said everything, and then he said that he understood if I needed time or space or if I simply didn't feel the same, and that none of those answers would change the fact that he valued what we had built as neighbors and as friends. I looked at him for a long time. "I've been waiting for you to say that," I said, "since April." He laughed. A real laugh, the kind I had come to understand was rare from him and therefore worth more. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Same reasons you didn't," I said. We were both, it turned out, people who had learned to be careful with the things they valued. In October, I found out I was pregnant. I sat in the bathroom of my house at 6 in the morning and stared at the test for a very long time. Marcus and I were new enough that I held this information alone for 2 days before I was ready to say it out loud. I knew what I had lost twice before. I knew what this feeling was. The hope that is also terror, the wanting that is also grief for the wanting. I called my mother first. She cried. I cried. Then I told Marcus. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with both hands around his coffee and listened, and when I finished he said, "Tell me what you need right now, not tomorrow, right now." I said, "I need you to not treat this like it's fragile. I need you to treat it like it's real." He reached across the table and held my hand and said, "It's real. I had a high-risk OB because of my history. My mother came back to Ashland for the first trimester. There were careful appointments and careful months, and the particular kind of waiting that is also a form of faith. You don't know. You can't know. You can't know. You keep going anyway. At 20 weeks, the ultrasound showed a healthy baby with a heartbeat so steady, the technician smiled before she even turned the screen toward me. Marcus was holding my hand. Nora, who had been briefed with age-appropriate seriousness, had declared that the baby should like ocean animals and was already planning the nursery. At 28 weeks, my OB flagged slightly elevated blood pressure. I was monitored closely. I worked reduced hours. Marcus learned to cook 3 additional meals my OB had recommended and made them without ceremony. The way he did everything that mattered. At 34 weeks, our son was born. Early, smaller than we had hoped, but breathing on his own, which the NICU team told us was remarkable and which I already knew because he had clearly decided from the beginning that he was going to be fine. We named him James, after Marcus's grandfather and my father, who are both gone, and whom we thought deserved to be part of something this good. Derek found out the way you find out things now. Through someone who knew someone. Through the particular efficiency of a small professional world. He called once, I did not answer. He texted to say he hoped I was well. I have not responded. His name is no longer part of my days. That is all I have to say about him. Nora meets James every other weekend and treats him with the confident authority of someone who has already decided this is her brother and is simply waiting for him to be old enough to agree. River sits next to the bassinet with a gravity that suggests he takes the responsibility seriously. My mother has a guest room in Ashland now. Not a permanent address, she has her own life and her own house in Bend, where she has lived since my father died, but a room with her things in it, a coffee mug that's hers, a key that's hers. The rosemary is on the porch railing where it has been since the morning Marcus returned it to me repaired, gold lines and all. Nora waters it every weekend. She reports to me on its condition with the precision of someone compiling data. Rosie grew 2 new branches, she told me last Sunday. Good, I said. She likes it here, Nora said. I looked at the plant, at the gold in the breaks, at the new growth coming in from the ends, and I thought about the morning it fell and shattered and I stood on the steps in my bathrobe thinking, that's exactly where I am. I was right. That was exactly where I was, and where I am now is different in every way that matters. I used to think that being broken was the problem, that the goal was to return to what you were before the break, seamless, unmarked, as if nothing had happened. I spent a long time trying to reconstruct that, to get back to some version of Claire who hadn't been through any of it. She's gone. I'm not getting her back. What I have instead is this: a son who sleeps in the next room making sounds that are incomprehensibly small and dear. A man who makes coffee too early in the morning and reads on the porch in the dark and told me his feelings out loud without making me guess. A 7-year-old who renamed my plant and is right about the name. A mother who drove 4 hours to sit with me when I was scared and didn't say a single thing that wasn't true. A pot with gold in the breaks, in a house that is mine, in a town where the air is slower, where things grow in their own time. The rosemary is blooming. It does that in Ashland, even in the cold. Something about the soil, maybe. Something about the light. I don't know exactly. I only know it's growing. And so am I.